The bike behind me is my new bike, but I haven't been able to talk about it until, well, today. So let's do just that. Let's talk about it.
Just so we're clear, this is not a review.
This is not a review. I am a GT sponsored athlete and it would be very biased if I did a review, so I cannot do a review of this. So this is not a review. 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 Did I make myself clear? This is not a review.
This is a new Force 29 car. Force Carbon 29? Force Carbon. Force Carbon. So this is a new Force 29 Carbon. The Force Carbon is essentially a blend of two bikes that they've already had in their lineup. The downhill bike, which is the GT Fury, and the Force 29. It takes stuff that they know from both bikes and feeds it into this one ripping machine. And so I sound like a total bro. And if you want to know why I'm personally not going to be touching a downhill bike much this year, well, this is the reason. I literally just built on my downhill bike, and a week or two later I got this thing in my hand. It feels like a downhill bike that can climb up hills. It's absolutely amazing. So let's talk about the unique things that make this bike what it is. So first, let's start off with the wheel size. It's full 29, front and back, front, back, front, back, front, back, front, back. It's got 170 millimeters of travel in the front and 160 in the back. Now, the last Force had 150, so this is a step up from the last bike. The previous Force was completely aluminum. The previous Force 29 was completely aluminum. Why can I not say that word right now? This thing has a front triangle that's made out of carbon and a rear triangle that's made out of aluminum. So something that I really appreciate is in this generation Force, they've really cleaned up the aesthetics. This top tube flows into the seat stay, this down tube flows into the chain stay. I thought the Force 29 was pretty good looking, but one of my biggest pet peeves was how tall the top tube looked. They were able to shrink it down quite a bit, so the standover height is not only less, that also means the seat tube is a lot shorter, meaning you can run a lot longer of a dropper post. This right here is the longest dropper post I could find on the market. It's a 210 millimeter dropper post. And you can see, I still have room for more drop if I could find a longer dropper post. Another thing to take note of is the huge space we have here. That's on purpose. This is for storage. If you need to store your tubes, some CO2 cartridges, maybe some tire levers, you got space right here to do just that. So this year, instead of going with a flip chip design like they had on some of their previous bikes, they're going with a wheelbase. What is that called? This one takes the flip chip, which used to be located at the bottom of the rear shock, and now it puts it at the back of the bike. This will extend and lengthen the rear end of the bike or shorten it depending on your riding style. The short rear end will give the bike a little bit more playful feel, a little bit more fun for those looking for it, while the long position is for riders who are looking for a little bit more stability at high speeds. And because of the weight distribution, it will mean you have a little bit more weight on your front wheel, which will give you better traction throughout turns. This year, GT has gone for an internal cable routing system. There's tubes inside the tubes, so tube and tube routing system. So that means you're not gonna have to fish the cable as you try to fish it through. It's just gonna come out the other end once you push it. But something to take note of is right here, this crossover pattern. For those of you who are GT fanboys, you might recognize this because this has existed on previous GT bikes, and that's something that GT is pretty fond of. They're fond of doing some cool callbacks to some of their previous popular designs, and this is one of them. Now, another small touch I really like about this bike is the built-in chainstay protector, which GT is calling the ruckus reducer. It does a really good job deadening any noise coming from your chain, and especially combined with this little chain guide here, this thing is pretty much a silent assassin. This thing is dead quiet on the trails. It's very impressive. Now, where it gets interesting is when it comes to this thing right here. You may have seen this on a few bikes. It's not necessarily a new idea, but over the past few years, you've seen a few bikes start to implement this.
Now, this is the internet, so I can see the comments coming in already talking about how this company did this first, GT's just copying, blah, blah. Let's take a step back and talk about the man behind the curtain. So this is Luis. He is the lead suspension engineer and essentially comes up with the geometry and suspension design for these bikes.
160 mil travel, that's fine. I don't mind. That's right where you need to be.
Sure.
If a bike company was a restaurant, you could essentially think of him as a head chef. Now, Luis has an extensive background in automotive engineering, and he's taken what he's learned from that field and has applied it to mountain bikes. Now, one of the core things that Luis brings from the automotive side of things is data-driven results.
10, 25.4, so we're like bang on where we need to be. The fork is at 20%.
Before many people would listen to him, he was a huge advocate for telemetry to dictate how suspension should be set up. Over a decade ago, Luis started his own bike company called K9 Industries. And one of the big design features of his bikes was a high pivot design with an idler pulley. So he has more experience with this design than almost anybody in the business. But that doesn't answer the question, what the heck does this thing actually do?
So this thing right here is called an idler. To the untrained eye, what it looks like is a just random pulley wheel that just makes the chain go higher. It's actually quite clever solution to a problem that you may not know you've had. But to help explain that, I want to take a step back and take a look at a bike with a normal suspension setup. So let's move this bike off to the side and grab the previous generation Force 29. So this is a previous generation Force 29, and it's overall a really capable bike. But as you can see, it doesn't have an idler pulley. As we go further into our travel, the more the cranks move. Now, when you're bombing down rough terrain like a rock garden, you generally want to keep your pedals level. Now, on a bike without an idler, if you try to keep your pedals level, well, it actually pulls the drivetrain because we have to pedal forwards a little bit. So that affects how the rear suspension works. So the suspension and the drivetrain are kind of linked, they're not isolated. So now let's go bring in the new Force Carbon and take a look at how that suspension behaves. All right, so now that we have this bike in our hand that does have the idler, let's take a look at how the cranks behave when it goes through travel. So as you can see by that demonstration, the cranks stay level throughout the whole travel. Now, how does this pulley actually achieve that? As you probably know, the shortest distance from point A to point B, in this case being our bottom bracket and our rear axle, is a straight line. On the bottom here, we have, well, we don't have a straight line because we have this derailleur. And the derailleur helps account for what we call chain growth, because as you go deeper into the travel, the distance from here to here gets longer. But the derailleur is spring-loaded and it can give out some tension. But on the top side, we have this idler pulley. And as you can see, it's routed up and to the rear axle. That is not a direct path. So as it goes further into the travel and this distance gets longer, well, this distance actually remains the same, which is how they achieve this result. Honestly, I'm gonna pause the video right there because I think I can do a better job explaining this on paper.
Grab some paper, a Sharpie, set you up over here. Smokey, really? Yeah, go back over there. We can basically think of our suspension as a big triangle. So point A being our bottom bracket and point B being our axle. But there's also point C, and point C is our idler. So as the distance from point A to point B gets longer, the distance from point A to C and C to B remain the same. It's just that that angle just kind of strains out a little bit. And that's how the idler pulley achieves this result. All right, let's get back to the video.
So when the suspension engineers are designing a bike for a regular suspension setup, they have to think about that chain growth because they don't want the cranks to move too much and affect the suspension too much. So they're somewhat limited. But by adding an idler pulley, they're able to play with the suspension design a little bit more. So in this case, this pivot is actually mounted a lot higher, which allows for the suspension to work better. That also means there's more chain growth, but that doesn't matter because we're able to account for that with this idler pulley. So it's a pretty clever solution to get better performance without any of the drawbacks. So I'm not someone who really likes to talk about the components on my bike. I do geek out on that stuff, but I don't like talking about it. I like riding my bike, and that's kind of where it stays. But a lot of people wonder what I'm running, so let's go through it. So this is the GT Force Pro LE build kit. That's a mouthful. So it's a top tier build kit that GT offers, and I've kept it pretty close to stock. There's only a few things I've changed, mainly because it's really hard to find parts right now, but two, the build kit is actually pretty solid. The first big change, well, these hoops. These are the Nobl TR37 hoops. They're the carbon hoops. I'm sponsored by Nobl. I've been running their products forever because they last. I never have to chew these wheels. So I'd be crazy to run anything else. Secondly, listen to that. That's a dead silent hub. TR37s with the Onyx Vesper hub. Onyx is also a sponsor and they make the silent hubs. Silent, instant engagement, can't go wrong. Literally my favorite setup ever. So that's why you see it on literally all my bikes. All right, moving on here. I am a flat pedal rider, so I find the meanest pedals I can find, and these are the Chromag Dagas. As far as pedals go, are probably the most lethal pedals out there. They will keep your feet on pedal, but if you slip your pedal, well, goodbye to your shins. I've been a Fox guy for most of my riding career, but I'm not opposed to trying different things. And since this bike came with a Zeb, I figured I'd try it. And so far, I'm really impressed. I think the initial feel of RockShox versus Fox, RockShox actually feels a little bit smoother. The thing is, if you're a racer, they're a little bit harder to fine tune if you wanna do that granular tuning. Now it's kind of weird to talk about bottle cages, but I've been actually a huge fan of this design bottle cage. I've never dropped a bottle, so if you're looking for a bottle cage that doesn't drop bottles, try this one on. Moving over to the front, we have the DD Copperhead stem. I run a 15 mil stem. It's a little bit longer than most people like to run. I like to get more weight over my front wheel so I get more traction and I can turn better. Now, one of the big changes this year is I'm running SRAM brakes. I ran SRAM brakes 10 years ago and I hated them, but that's because I hated the bleed process. And now that I'm older, wiser, and I've had more experience working on my bike, I'm giving them another go. One of the things I really enjoy about the codes is they have a bearing on the lever, so they're super smooth. But not only are they super smooth, they're actually really, really powerful. You'll notice that the cables are still a little bit long. I haven't cut those yet. We'll get to that. And we're also gonna be doing a little bit more color coordinating down the line, but since I've been riding this bike under embargo, I've been trying to keep it pretty stealth. So that's why I haven't been drawing too much attention to it. As far as bars go, these are actually the stock bars. And you know what? I like them. They've got a little bit of rise, they look good, they do the job. This is a 1-up dropper post, and this is the biggest dropper post I could find on the market. It's got 210 mils of travel, but I don't love it. It wobbles. It's really annoying. Also, this Chromag quick release C-post clamp is the best quick release C-post clamp on the market, hands down. It's got a brass bushing and that makes it super smooth to clamp. And it's highly, highly underrated. I like it because I can still kind of move my dropper post around if I want to get a little bit more drop on certain trails. In front here, I'm running the Assegai. I do have Cush Core installed and this EXO Plus casing. I've run that combination for a while now. I did get one puncture already with the Cush Core installed in the back. I think it got a little bit of a tear on a rock, so there's a good chance I'm gonna go to a double down in the back. So that's a complete rundown of my bike in terms of parts. Now, moving down the line, if you do wanna see me riding this bike, I do have a riding video coming out next week, so stay tuned. And I've actually posted one already. If you saw the Killington video, you'll notice I was riding this bike and Haley was riding her new Force Carbon as well. So yeah, she got a new bike too, which is somewhere over there behind the lights. So as always, my name is Phil Metz. Thanks for playing bikes with me today. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.